Okay, picture this. You are on a ferry leaving Belgium. The sea is calm. People are having coffee, walking around, finding their seats. Down below, the vehicle deck is full of cars and trucks. Nothing feels dangerous. Then, a cup slides across a table. A chair follows. And before people even understand what is happening, the whole floor begins to tilt. The lights go out, windows break. People are thrown against walls that only a second earlier were the floor. And just 4 minutes after passing the harbour wall, the ferry is lying on its side. There was no storm, no collision or some explosion. So, what could knock over a ship this large, this quickly, before the journey had even really begun? And just so you can picture where this happened, Zeebrugge is a port on the Belgian coast, right on the North Sea. The Herald has just left for Dover across the water in England. It passed the outer harbour wall, and about 4 minutes later, it capsized less than 1.3 kilometers from the harbour entrance. So no, this was not some disaster far out at sea. The ship had barely started the journey, and the answer to what brought it down was already on board. So let's go back about 20 minutes. The ship was called the Herald of Free Enterprise, and it was basically a huge floating parking garage. Cars and trucks entered through large doors at the front of the ship. They drove straight onto the wide vehicle deck. It was quick. Open the doors, load the vehicles, close the doors, leave. Simple. At least that was how it was supposed to work. But the port in Zeebrugge had a small problem. The loading ramp was too high for the ferry's upper vehicle deck. So the crew had to make the front of the ship sit lower in the water. And they did that by pumping seawater into large tanks inside the bow. Basically, they made the front heavier. Once loading was finished, they started pumping the water back out. But the pumps were slow, and the ferry was already late. So when the Herald began leaving the port, its nose was still lower than normal. Well, now, that alone was not enough to sink the ship, but it brought the sea much closer to the front entrance. And that was about to matter a lot. There was one crew member whose job was to close the bow doors before departure, but he had been working earlier that day. He returned to his cabin, lay down, and fell asleep. He did not hear the call telling the crew to get ready. Okay, so one man was asleep, but that should not be enough to sink a ship, right? Surely somebody else would notice. Well, another crew member saw that nobody was standing at the door controls, but he thought, well, that is not my job. The officer responsible for checking the vehicle deck believed the right man would arrive in a moment. Then he left for the bridge because he had another job to do during departure. Everybody expected somebody else to finish the task, and nobody stopped the ship. Up on the bridge, the captain was preparing to leave, but from where he stood, he could not see the bow doors. There was no camera showing them, no warning light, or no simple little sign saying open or closed. The system worked in a very strange way. If the doors were still open, someone was supposed to tell the captain. And if nobody said anything, the captain assumed they were closed. That evening, nobody said anything. So the Herald left Zeebrugge with both bow doors wide open. Not broken, not damaged or stuck, just open. And for the first few minutes, nothing happened. That is the scary part. The ferry moved slowly through the protected harbour. The sea was still below the open entrance. Passengers felt nothing unusual. The captain saw no warning. The ship continued forward as if everything was fine. Then it passed the outer harbor wall. The captain increased the power and the ferry began moving faster. Remember, the front of the ship was still sitting too low because of the water in those tanks. And when a large ship speeds up in a shallow water, it can settle even lower. At the same time, the ship pushes a wave in front of itself. So now you have three things happening together. The bow is already too low, the ferry begins sinking slightly lower as it accelerates, and wave is rising in front of the open doors. For a few moments the water gets closer and closer, and then it reaches the opening. The sea does not enter as a small leak, it comes in like a river, A huge amount of water pours straight onto the vehicle deck. And that deck is one enormous open space. There are almost no walls inside to stop the water moving from one side to the other. So the ferry leans slightly. The water runs toward the lower side. That extra weight pushes the ship farther over. More water enters. Then all of it moves to the same side again. When you carry a tray with water on it, if the water begins sliding to one side, you try to correct it, but then it rushes back even harder. Now imagine that tray is the size of a ship, and thousands of tons of seawater are moving across it. The Herald began rolling over almost immediately. People could not stay on their feet. Chairs, tables, luggage, and broken glass slid through the passenger areas. Cars and trucks shifted below. The lights failed, and spaces that people knew only moments earlier became completely confusing. Like the floor was now a wall, or doors were suddenly above people's heads. Stairways led sideways. The ship continued rolling until it hit the shallow seabed. That was the only reason it did not disappear completely underwater. 193 people died. And now, after something like this, it is very tempting to say, well, one man fell asleep, that was the cause. But no, that is the easy answer. And honestly, it hides the more important part of the story. The company already knew that ships could leave port with their bow doors open. It had happened before on other ferries. Captains had even asked for warning lights on the bridge. Just one simple light that would tell them whether the doors were safely closed. The management did not treat it as urgent. The thinking was basically, why do we need a warning light when somebody is already responsible for closing the doors? And, that sounds almost reasonable, until that person is tired, or distracted, or believes somebody else will do it. A warning light was considered unnecessary before the disaster. After the disaster, the other ships received them almost immediately. And the man who fell asleep, he did not simply escape and disappear. After the ferry rolled over, he climbed onto the hull. Then he went back into the freezing water to help passengers. He broke a window, badly cut his arm, and continued helping until the cold and blood loss became too much. He made a mistake, but he was not some evil person who wanted anyone to get hurt. The real problem was that the safety of more than 500 people depended on one tired man completing one task, with no reliable check behind him. That is what makes this disaster so difficult to forget. Nobody made one huge, dramatic decision. Instead, several people made very small assumptions. He will close the doors. Someone else will check them. If there is a problem, the captain will be told. And if nobody says anything, everything must be fine, right? Each assumption probably felt harmless, but together they left the front of the ship open to the sea. The Herald did not sink because the crew ignored one clear warning. It sank because the system was designed so that the warning never reached the bridge. And once the sea finally gave them that warning, there were only 4 minutes left. If you want to uncover more stories like this with me, subscribe to Failure Atlas. And now you choose our next destination. Which failure should we put on the map next?